This presentation is part of a series on how to use WOCAT methods and tools for the assessment and documentation of sustainable land management, SLM, technologies and approaches. I welcome you to this overview presentation on how to use the WOCAT questionnaires to document SLM technologies and approaches. WOCAT stands for World Overview of Conservation Approaches and Technologies. It is an international network of SLM specialists. WOCAT's motto is "Learn from those who have done it," meaning that one should focus on the wealth of knowledge existing among land users, extension services, governmental and non-governmental projects and programs, researchers, and so forth. WOCAT has developed tools to document, share, and use this knowledge about SLM. The two questionnaires on technologies and approaches provide a framework for documentation and evaluation of experiences in SLM and guide the specialist through all relevant aspects of SLM. The information is documented from and with the land users and is entered into the questionnaires. After filling the questionnaires, the data is entered into the online database using a computer data entry form. From the database, a standardized 4-page summary can be generated, which allows an easy, quick understanding and comparison of SLM technologies and approaches. A SLM technology, according to WOCAT's definition, consists of agronomic, vegetative, structural, and/or management measures that prevent and control land degradation and enhance productivity in the field. Here are some examples of documented SLM technologies pertaining to the different conservation measures: stonewall terraces, infiltration ditches, agroforestry, shelter belts, multi-story cropping, grass strips, cut and carry, area closures, forest protection, composting, no-till technology, and conversion from grazing to fruit and fodder production. A SLM approach, according to WOCAT's definition, describes the ways and means of support that help introduce, implement, adapt, and apply SLM technologies on the ground. An approach ensures an enabling environment within which SLM can succeed. Here are some documented examples of SLM approaches: applied research and knowledge transfer, soil management initiative, productive development and food security program, Zabre Women's Agroecological Program, promoting farmer innovation, farmer initiative within enabling environment, integrated rural community development, transition from centralized regime to local initiative, comprehensive watershed development, incentive-based catchment treatment. Let's have a closer look at the WOCAT questionnaires on technologies and approaches. The questionnaires help to describe and analyze the technologies and approaches in a structured and standardized way. The two questionnaires are complementary, asking details about a SLM technology and its implementation in QT, and about the broader enabling environment in QA. The questionnaires can be used to document SLM experiences and examples of successful and partly successful SLM, as well as failures. Ideally, a team of SLM specialists fills in the questionnaires. It is recommended that the SLM specialists have different backgrounds and experiences and are familiar with the details of the technology and the approach. Specialists should, as much as possible, make use of documents such as project reports, case studies, photos, and maps. They should consult with land users and other resource persons, such as project personnel, agricultural advisors, researchers, and so forth. If no hard data is available, specialists should provide a best estimate based on professional judgment. Now to some general principles that help in filling the questionnaires. Get familiar with the questionnaires. Hence, for optimal preparation, read through the questionnaires before using them the first time. Use the definitions given even when they deviate from your own or national definitions. Before going to the field, identify and mark the questions that need to be asked to the land users. Note that certain questions specifically differentiate between your opinion, the expert opinion, and the land user's opinion. Make use of the specify remark comments column or line as much as possible, and always indicate if information is not available or a question is not applicable. Looking at the layout of the questionnaires, you can see that shaded or gray parts are questions to be filled in, and unshaded or white parts and what is written in italics are definitions, explanations, or examples. There are different types of questions. Open questions, which you have to answer with text, or questions which offer a list or catalog of possible answers from which you have to choose and/or rank. Circles always require ranking. It is possible to give the same rank to several answers, but not necessarily all circles need to be given a number from 1 to 3. Squares must be ticked. If several answers possible is not indicated, only one box can be ticked. Good photos and drawings are crucial for understanding and illustrating the main features of the technology or approach. Always upload photos in the highest resolution you have them available. If needed, check the manual on formatting pictures with Irfan View. Now let's have a closer look at the technology questionnaire. The questionnaire consists of 3 main parts: general information, specifications of SLM technology, and thirdly, analysis of SLM technology. In the following, some of the key questions are looked at. Part 1 starts with the details on the contributing specialist and affiliated institution. Approval is given to use and disseminate the documented information by WOCAT with a signature. A frequently asked question relates to the authorship of the questionnaires. On each documented technology or approach, it is indicated clearly who has compiled the questionnaire. Contact persons and institutions are named and logos can be added. A code will be assigned to the technology automatically when you are entering the information in the database. Note that the questionnaire code is a unique identifier for each technology and approach. It is composed of a country abbreviation and a consecutive number. Do not use generic name as a common name or title. Be more specific to ensure that the technology or approach can be easily identified and distinguished from similar documentations. How to identify a SLM technology. A SLM technology should cover a homogeneous set of natural or biophysical conditions as well as human or socio-economic conditions. Therefore, the technology should not cover, for instance, very dissimilar climatic zones, land use types, altitudinal zones, slope categories, or very dissimilar conditions of land tenure. One of the most difficult questions is about the total area under the technology. It refers to the area where the SLM technology is already implemented and includes both the area occupied by conservation measures and the additional area protected by them. For example, it includes the area between structures or vegetation strips. Providing the coordinates in latitude and longitude of the center of the SLM technology or by indicating its boundary points, allows to place mark the technology and show it in Google Earth. A manual to provide coordinates for Google Earth can be consulted under the indicated link. Part 2 is about defining and describing the technology. The one-sentence definition should contain keywords of the technology and will determine whether anyone searching the database will read further. The summary ideally provides a comprehensive and concise picture of the technology to the outsiders, as is shown by the example from China. This example will accompany us throughout this presentation. At least 2 photos of the technology should be provided. For optimal understanding, they should match the description and back up the technical drawing. After describing the technology, the major land use problems for which the technology was implemented need to be specified. Here, for the first time, the land user's point of view is requested separately. The next question is about the land use types and their subcategories, on which the technology is applied. If the land use has changed due to the implementation of the technology, indicate the original, current, and final land use. The main land use types according to WOCAT are annual cropping, perennial cropping, tree shrub cropping, extensive grazing land, intensive grazing land, natural forests, plantations, afforestation, agroforestry, agropastoralism, agro-silvopastoralism, silvopastoralism, mines and extractive industries, settlements, infrastructure, wastelands, deserts, glaciers, swamps, and so forth. Next comes the question about the conservation measures applied. A SLM technology can consist of one or a combination of SLM measures. Combinations are shown by choosing more than one measure and ranking them. SLM measures belong to the following categories: agronomic, like intercropping, contour cultivation, mulching; vegetative, such as tree planting, hedge barriers, grass strips; or structural, for example, graded banks or bunds, level bench terraces; and management, such as land use change, area closure, rotational grazing. Some of these measures seek to prevent land degradation, and others mitigate the effects of degradation. A third category of measures is applied on totally degraded areas with the aim of rehabilitating or restoring at least part of the productive capacity of the soil and make the land usable again. The next question asks about the land degradation types addressed by the technology. Here again, a combination of degradation types is possible. Land degradation types belong to the following categories: soil erosion by water, soil erosion by wind, chemical soil deterioration, physical soil deterioration, biological degradation, and water degradation. Question 2.3.1 is about the origin of the technology, in other words, how and by whom the technology was developed. Was it by the land user himself or herself? Or was it introduced by extension agents, project specialists, or by researchers? The next question pertains to the level of know-how or technical knowledge of the stakeholders to implement the technology. Section 2.5 on technical specifications, implementation activities, inputs, and costs is the most demanding section concerning facts and figures. If you have indicated only one conservation measure before, answer the questions in the relevant section which corresponds to that conservation measure. If you have indicated more than one measure before, fill out each corresponding section. Each section includes questions on the type and layout of the measure, and on the activities, inputs, and costs of the measure. To facilitate and avoid misunderstandings about implementation activities, inputs, and costs, carefully read the notes on page 14. For example, specifying the alignment and layout of structural measures and of vegetative measures in the tables should help to sketch the technical drawing which shows technical specifications, dimensions, and spacing. For implementation activities, inputs, and costs, a distinction is made between initial establishment and maintenance or annually recurrent activities. All conservation-related activities, inputs, and costs that are additional to ordinary field operations have to be indicated. In case the ordinary field operations have changed or have become part of the technology, like for most agronomic measures such as conservation agriculture, enter all activities and costs under maintenance and indicate if an initial investment for special machinery was made. For management measures, a clear distinction between establishment and maintenance activities and costs can be made. Activities, inputs, and costs should be indicated per area, preferably per hectare, to guarantee comparability between different technologies. Inputs and costs can alternatively be calculated per unit other than hectare, such as per entity, for example for a dam, or per length of a measure, for example a meter of grass strip. To obtain an overview of all establishment and maintenance costs of the implemented technology, add up the total costs and insert them into the table in section 2.6. For easier comparison, convert all costs into US dollar per hectare. In section 2.7, the natural or biophysical conditions where the SLM technology is applied are collected. These include questions about average annual rainfall, agroclimatic zone, growing seasons per year, altitude, landforms, slopes, soil information, water information, and biodiversity. Most of these questions demand a ranking. The tolerance and sensitivity of a technology to climatic extremes such as temperature increase, heavy rainfall or droughts is elicited in question 2.7.5 under the section on natural environment. In section 2.8, the human socio-economic conditions where the SLM technology is applied are collected. This includes questions about land users applying the technology, population density, land ownership, land use and water use rights, significance of off-farm income, access to services and infrastructure. And for each land use type on which the technology is applied, market orientation, type of system, purpose, land size, and so on are assessed. Most of these questions demand a ranking. In part 3, the technology is analyzed by assessing the impacts. Impacts can be beneficial or harmful. They can be on-site and off-site. Impacts can be sorted under the following groups or headings: production and socio-economic, socio-cultural, and ecological. The measurements of benefits can be qualitative and quantitative. Section 3.2 gives an economic analysis. Here, the land user has to compare the reported benefits with establishment costs as well as maintenance costs, and he or she has to estimate the short-term and long-term returns. In section 3.4, concluding statements are provided by the SLM expert documenting the technology. They comprise the strengths of the technology and how they can be sustained or enhanced, and the weaknesses and how they can be overcome. Strengths and weaknesses can be named separately by land users. Often specialists and land users perceive advantages and disadvantages differently, or they give emphasis to different priorities. Last but not least, in the annex, more space is given to indicate further contributors and contact persons of the documented technology and allows to list useful references that were used to fill the questionnaire or offer supporting information. Now let's have a look at the approach questionnaire. Similarly to the questionnaire on technologies, the approach questionnaire is made up of 3 main parts: general information, specification of SLM approach, and thirdly, analysis of SLM approach. The approach questionnaire addresses the questions of how implementation was achieved and who achieved it. A SLM approach consists of the following: all participants or stakeholders, from policymakers, administrators, experts, technicians to land users, financial, material, legislative inputs and means, and technical, scientific, practical know-how. An approach may include different levels of intervention: the individual farm or community level, the extension or advisory system, the regional or national administration, the policy level up to the international framework. An approach not only includes promotion by projects or programs, but also indigenous practices, adaptations of technologies, and their spontaneous spread. In the case of a project, only information that is directly and indirectly relevant to the technology is of interest. Let's look at some key questions of the approach. Part 1 is similar to Part 1 of the technology questionnaire. It includes information on contributing specialists, the approach code, common name of the approach, and area information. Ideally, the technology code and the corresponding approach code have the same number. Question 1.2.4 about the focus of the approach puts the activities related to the implementation of the technology into a context and shows if they were a priority or a welcomed side effect. The last question in part 1 is about providing photos that show impressions from the approach. Part 2 includes the definition and extended summary of the approach, the type or origin of the approach, and the main problems addressed. You can see here that the questionnaires on technology and approaches are structured in a similar way. Provide, if possible, an organizational chart or a flow chart. Here an example showing an organigram. After stating the problems, the main objectives or aims of the approach are addressed. These not only cover project objectives, but also those of individual initiatives. The next section is about decision-making at various levels. It covers how decisions were made on the choice of the SLM technology and on the method of implementing the technology. The next questions deal with who designed the approach and by whom it was implemented. As expected for an approach, the question about participation is very central. The section asks about stakeholders and target groups. Next, we come to the involvement of land users and local communities during the various phases of the approach. These include the initiation, planning, implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and the research phase. The participation section also inquires about if there were differences between men and women and if socially and economically disadvantaged groups were involved. We now move on to financing. First, the source of funding and what percentage of the costs were met by which donor is requested. Then you are asked to estimate the annual budget needed or used for the SLM approach. The next section on technical support and promotion covers training and awareness raising and in what form, the type and appropriateness of the advisory service offered, and if and what type of research was undertaken. Next to the technical support, material support can be crucial for the implementation and adoption of a technology. Material support can be in form of subsidies or compensation by the state and/or the private sector. It can be in form of different compensations for labor, such as food for work or payment in cash. In the next question, what and how much was financed by the approach has to be listed in details. The last two questions of Part 2 examine first if credit was provided and under what repayment conditions, and second if local institutions were supported under the approach, for example, by offering trainings or financial support. Part 3 is the analysis of the SLM approach. It starts with describing what aspects were monitored and if this monitoring and the evaluation of results had led to changes in the approach and/or in the technology. The coming section attends to the analysis of impacts. The SLM approach can help improve sustainable land management, or it can improve human well-being or the situation of socially and economically disadvantaged groups. Impact analysis also includes questions about the effectiveness of training, advisory services, and research, about how the approach affected or was affected by land ownership and land or water use rights, and about the long-term impact of subsidies on the implementation of SLM. We have reached the concluding statements. Before listing the strengths and weaknesses, there is a question on sustainability of activities and on the main motivation of land users to implement SLM. Is it purely economic or to obey rules and regulations, or out of environmental consciousness? The strengths of the approach and how they can be sustained or enhanced, and the weaknesses and how they can be overcome are provided by the SLM expert documenting the approach, as well as by the land users. Often specialists and land users perceive advantages and disadvantages differently. Thank you very much for watching and listening to this presentation. If you need more information or help, please contact the WOCAT Secretariat or visit the WOCAT website.